Good afternoon. I'm Marc Minno from Gainesville. I've worked on butterflies many years in Florida. I have several books and other ID guides back there if anybody's interested in that. I'm also speaking this evening at the Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center with Tom Hecker starting at 7 or 6, Tom? 6:30. Thank you. Butterflies, like many pollinators, seem to be in decline in many places. And Florida is sold as a tropical paradise, but every one of you know that there's trouble in paradise, and that's true for the butterflies as well, where many of the butterflies in Florida are declining, or we're actually losing some to extinction. Here's a map showing just the location. The West Indies are one of the world's great hot spots for biodiversity because there's so many endemic plants and animals, meaning they're found nowhere else. They're unique forms. I'll just point out that the Greater Antilles here, the larger islands, are pieces of Central America that have been shifting towards Africa, towards the east for millennia. And so the plants and animals on these larger islands are derived from species that were in Central America millions of years ago. And so that's where, in being isolated, they've differentiated into unique forms, many of them. The Lesser Antilles here are the tips of volcanoes. These are volcanic islands where the plates are grinding together and producing these volcanoes. And so everything on those islands is very unique. It had to get there by dispersal over water, either from South America or from elsewhere in the West Indies. The Bahamas are a lot like Florida, South Florida, in that their faunas were derived and flora from dispersal from the Greater Antilles, and so they've differentiated also into unique forms. Well, I've been going to the Keys for many years, starting in 1982, so I've had a long history of looking at butterflies in South Florida. But more recently, starting in 2006, I started working with the Florida Keys Mosquito Control District because they were worried about impacts from mosquito spraying on many of the rare butterflies that occur in the Keys. And I did monthly surveys for 6 years over the time period from 2006 to 2012. And it gave me a great perspective. In fact, it was amazing. Some of these, it turned out not to be what I expected to find in that time period. But so I found about 69 or about 70 species out of the 121 reported for the Keys. And there were fewer butterflies in the upper and middle Keys compared to the lower Keys. And the islands that had the most species were Big Pine Key, and then oddly enough, Key West and Stock Island are here, Scout Key, some really tiny islands in the lower Keys, as well as Key Largo and Plantation Key here in the upper Keys. So some of these unusual findings then were that this is an aerial photo from Google of Key West and Stock Island over here. And you can see it's all gray because it's almost entirely urban and a very small place. The blue circles represent areas with natural habitat, either such as Fort Zachary Taylor State Park here, or city parks, or the Botanical Garden on Stock Island. Oddly enough, these tiny places of little postage stamp sized places had some of the richest diversity of butterflies and abundance of butterflies of anywhere in the Keys, including state parks and national parks. It makes no sense. These are places that are sprayed. They had dengue fever outbreaks. They were spraying for that. And yet, through all that, these places still have more butterflies than just about any other place in the Keys. It doesn't make sense. I also determined that 3 butterflies are probably extinct. It's hard to know if something's extinct because if you don't find it, is that because you just didn't look on the right day or whatever? But we've been looking, these haven't been seen for many years now, and they're probably extinct. So 3 unique butterflies to South Florida are probably extinct. There's only 4 other butterflies in the entire United States, these are all western species in California, that are thought to be extinct. So, and now we have 3 here in South Florida. So something's wrong. We have legal protection for things like butterflies at the federal level through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Endangered Species Act of 1973, and also the state of Florida with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. These are the agencies that have authority to protect wildlife. They can list wildlife species as threatened or endangered and give them legal protection. Here you see some of South Florida's most endangered butterfly species. Starting up here, you'll see the swallowtail. This was the first insect listed by the Fish and Wildlife Service on the endangered species list. In 1976, it was listed as threatened, and that was later upgraded to endangered in 1984. And you probably know too, then we went through a period of many years where the Fish and Wildlife Service just wasn't listing anything. And it was only in response to lawsuits by some conservation organizations that they reached a settlement agreement and agreed to at least evaluate hundreds of different plants and animals throughout the United States. And as a response to that, they started listing some of the butterflies in South Florida. That includes the Miami blue, which was listed as endangered in 2012. Just last year, they listed the Bartram scrub hairstreak and the Florida leafwing. They're still evaluating the Keys Palatka skipper, which I fully expect to be listed as endangered probably next year. And a possible candidate is the Florida white, which is now nearly extinct in Florida. Let's look at some of these in more detail. Here's the swallowtail. The blue circle here shows the entire range. It's only in the Upper Keys, mostly in Biscayne National Park. It's an odd butterfly for a tropical butterfly because it only has 1 generation per year. The adults only fly in basically May and June. Although you see in this diagram here, there are some other records from elsewhere in the season, but almost all of them are highly synchronized to come out only in May and June. And right now there's big surveys for that. If anybody wants to participate, you can come out with us, get bit by mosquitoes, and look for swallowtails in Biscayne National Park or Key Largo. This butterfly, in the last few years, it was nearly gone. We only found a handful, maybe 6 individuals in Biscayne National Park. And then just this year, this past season, it did much better probably in response to rains, and I think there were a couple of hundred of them seen on Key Largo as well as Biscayne National Park. Miami blue historically occurred along both coasts. It's a tropical butterfly as well as throughout the Keys. It was one of the most common butterflies in the Keys. Now it's down to just a couple of populations on tiny islands off of Key West, almost extinct, and there's a recovery plan being put together for this one. The Bartram scrub hairstreak is, you'll see the red circle down here in Big Pine Key. That was one of the best sites for this butterfly. It's now nearly extinct on Big Pine Key. It also occurs in Everglades National Park and just a couple of other places in Miami where there's natural habitat of this tropical pineland we call pine rockland, very rocky, lots of palms, lots of pine trees, and its host plant, the croton plant, Croton linearis, only grows in that habitat. And you may be reading in the papers about this upper circle. This is the Richmond Pinelands. There's a battle going on right now of whether that's going to remain Pine Rockland or whether it's going to become a Walmart and a water park. And so you'll see articles about it. This is an area that the Fish and Wildlife Service has determined is critical. It's critical habitat, meaning the butterfly must have it if it's in order to survive. And I don't know if it's going to make it. The Florida leafwing, it's extinct now on Big Pine Key. That was one of its strongholds in the 80s and before that, and now it's only found in Everglades National Park. You can still see them there, but if you see maybe 6 or so, half a dozen in a day, that's a pretty good day for finding Florida leafwings in Everglades National Park. That's how rare it is. The Palatka Skipper, this is a pretty widespread species on the Florida mainland, but there's a unique form of it in the lower keys, and that's the one that is being looked at right now by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So far as we know, it's only on Big Pine, maybe Cudjoe also, where historically it occurred all the way down to Key West in the lower keys. And the Florida white, as I mentioned, is nearly extinct. It pops up as temporary colonies, as shown by these yellow circles. It's more likely to be seen in the upper keys here on northern Key Largo. It seems to be gone from Biscayne National Park, and nobody knows what's happening with that. But in addition to those highly endangered butterflies, there's many others that are imperiled, which have lost habitat and are in trouble as well. And these are beautiful. These are jewels. This is some of Florida's most valuable, to me, biological treasure that we should try to keep. All of these species are tropical butterflies in South Florida that are declining and disappearing. So what is happening with the butterflies? You know, back in the 80s, we would say, oh yeah, it's mosquito control, spraying, and certainly they were blanketing many places with insecticides, which could kill butterflies and other kinds of critters. But it's more complicated than that. And just from my study from 2006 to 2012, places that are sprayed and highly urban seem to have more butterflies than even state parks that aren't sprayed or national parks. So what the heck is going on? It's more complicated than just the mosquito spraying. Habitat destruction certainly has played a large role in some of these, especially the pine rockland species, where that's highly developable upland for people as well. Habitat change, because habitats need managed now, especially the pinelands that have to be prescribed burned or managed in some way to maintain habitat for the butterflies. And I think this one, exotic predators or parasitoids, is one of the key elements to this. But we're also going to be faced with global warming and sea level rise, which is going to wipe out much of South Florida and coastal areas where some of these butterflies occur. My feeling is it's exotic predatory ants, though, is the main cause for why we're losing butterflies. It's the only explanation of why we're losing these species out of places like Everglades National Park, where there's over 1 million acres of prime unsprayed habitat. Why would the butterflies disappear from there? Or Biscayne National Park. These ants, all of them, the Mexican twig ant, the red imported fire ant, and the little fire ant, were first reported in South Florida in the 1970s, and it was in the 1980s that we first noticed that some of the butterflies there were in trouble and seemed to be disappearing. And so the time period seems about right. The ants, of course, have winged adults. Their kings and queens can fly, so they've now dispersed to just about everywhere in South Florida. And so just like the Burmese pythons are eating all the mammals out of Everglades National Park right now, these ants have been out there eating butterfly eggs and young caterpillars for decades, and I think those effects are really showing. Big Pine Key has been particularly hard hit, where these pineland specialist butterflies are all now gone, some of them extinct, like the Rockland mesquite skipper here. The others are still up on the mainland. But Big Pine was unique with having so much of the tropical pineland, unlike most of the other keys. And this unique fauna of butterflies has disappeared pretty much from there. In fact, there's not much left on Big Pine Key anymore, even though we have the National Key Deer Refuge there. Their pinelands are being overgrown by palms, by thatch palms, probably in response to sea level rise or climate change. And these butterflies mostly need open grassy habitats, which are not that's hard to find now on big pine. So huge losses on big pine key. In addition to that, there are butterflies. When Marie and I first moved to Florida, we lived in Fort Lauderdale, and I did many surveys for butterflies in Broward County in the 1982, 1984. The whirlabout skipper and the Carolina satyr were among the most common butterflies in Broward County. Now when I talk to butterfly watchers in Broward County and I ask them if you've seen these, and they've never seen them. Some of the most common butterflies from the 80s, they're not even there anymore. These butterflies are not rare. They're still quite common in central and northern Florida, but it shows that something's going on, that we're losing even some of the most common species that were there in the 80s. In addition to that, the cabbage white here down in the lower slide, this is a European butterfly that accidentally was introduced into North America. It's a pest of cabbages. If you're I'm from Pennsylvania, you couldn't grow cabbages in Pennsylvania because this butterfly, the caterpillars would just riddle it, look like lace after they were done with it. Anyway, it came into North America in the 1800s and spread throughout the whole continent. In Florida, it was recorded throughout the entire peninsula, even from Key West. You can't find a cabbage white anymore in peninsular Florida. It's gone. It's still up in the Panhandle. I saw some this spring in Niceville, but anywhere else in peninsular Florida, it's gone. Even Hastings, the cabbage growing area of Florida, there's no cabbage whites there. So what the heck is going on? Same with the orange sulfur, although this one's still around in a few places, but that one has severely declined as well. So there are, I guess my plea here is even common species seem to be disappearing or changing habitat ranges. And anyway, that's my talk. I guess, is anybody here interested in monitoring butterflies? Okay, there's several people here. I would love to talk with you about that because we need more monitoring. Butterflies are easy to survey for. We have great guides for them. And they will be a good indicator for all kinds of other pollinators of what could be happening as well. Any questions? Yes?
You mentioned the little fire ant.
Yeah.
Is that the same as the tiny fire ants they have in Hawaii, or is that a different species?
It's Wasmannia is the gene.
I don't know the Latin name.
It's probably the same one. I think these exotic ants get, transported all over the place. It's probably the same one.
And how long have they been in Florida?
They were first reported in the 1970s in South Florida. Okay. People noticed them because they would be having garden parties in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and these things would come raining out of the trees on them and sting them, but they're very tiny.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
It's probably the same one. I guess in response to this, we're not going to get rid of these ants, and so I think what we need to do though is find where are these butterflies still occurring, and what can we do to encourage them is what we need to do before they're entirely wiped out. Yes.
Just a quick question on the specialty license plate, Save Florida Wildlife. Is that the Miami Blue?
That is the Miami Blue,
okay.
and if you buy that license plate, part of that goes to Miami Blue butterfly research.
Good, I did.
Okay.
Could the large-scale use of Roundup commercially and so on have something to do with it also, and destroying the plants that they're feeding and laying eggs on?
Absolutely. In fact, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been petitioned to list the monarch butterfly as an endangered species, and the idea is that these Roundup ready crops, the genetically modified soybeans and corn, now farmers can plant those. They can spray the entire field with Roundup. It won't hurt the soybeans or the corn, but it kills every other kind of plant, including milkweed plants that the monarch depended on. In the old days, those fields would be full of milkweed plants that the monarchs used to use. And so, that's we're losing thousands and thousands of acres of potential breeding sites for the monarch because of those Roundup-ready crops and the use of Roundup. Roundup is, there's a lot of research going on Roundup now, and it's always been sold as the safest herbicide. You could drink it if you want, it's not going to hurt you. That's not the case. If you start looking at some of these studies, it's a powerful chemical, antibiotic activity. It kills bacteria and stuff in the soil. And so, I don't think we know what it's doing out there.
Marc, what was the exotic parasites that you referenced? You mentioned the ants. I assume they were the
there
predators.
could be exotic parasites or parasitoids. That's a very difficult thing. There's so few people left that study those organisms. It's hard to know. If you raise a caterpillar and some wasps come out, almost nobody can identify those, or if they can identify them, they can't tell you whether they were already here or from somewhere else. And so there could be, I'm just saying, there could be some other exotic kinds of wasps or things that have been introduced here in Florida in the past that we don't even know, and we may not be able to tell, that could be affecting things as well. Anyway, you've been a great audience. Oh, one more question.
As far as the native plants that these endangered butterflies are dependent upon, is there any push to make some of the non-readily available native plants more readily available, or propagation techniques to further the use of the native plants that they're dependent upon?
That's a good question about the native plants. Can we propagate more of the plants that these rare butterflies use as caterpillars? Yeah, I think many of those plants are easy to propagate, and you can put them in gardens and all. Theoretically, that's going to help, at least some of them. Some of these butterflies, though, are so specific. They would never go into a garden unless it would be a rare event. But some do, like the Florida white. They would travel and could potentially go to gardens and use that. In fact, on Big Pine Key, I know several people there that have backyard gardens, and they get some of these rare butterflies in their gardens all the time. And then you go out in the natural pine forest there, and there's almost nothing. It seems like there's very few nectar plants and that sort of thing. So, in that setting, gardens could play a huge role in helping the butterflies out. That's a good point. Okay, thank you so much.